Do you ever go through periods of time where you feel burnt out when it comes to gaming? That feeling that there are more games to play than ever before, but nothing you actually want to pick up? Every game kind of just seems derivative and uninspired, and you feel like you've been there before, done that a million times already. Sometimes I ponder the current state of modern games, and think about how long it's been since we've seen a mechanic or concept that really revolutionizes a genre or moves the industry forward as a whole. Take the original Gears of War, for example. While not technically the first game to use a single-button cover system, every environment was carefully crafted with it in mind, and its execution was incredibly polished. Just walk up to any wall or barrier, press A, then bam, you're in cover. This simple yet effective system is credited for Gears' massive success, and it would quickly go on to be adopted in everything from Grand Theft Auto to Deus Ex. This was a large, tangible shift in the third-person shooter genre that, at the time, fostered a sense of industry progression and excitement for the future. Fast forward to 2023, and I struggle to think of a recent step of that magnitude. Perhaps we've reached a point of mechanics creep, to where it's become nigh impossible to truly further innovate on something as basic as movement. Maybe this is why so many games today fail to stand out from the crowd and feel so samey. Maybe we've become spoiled, and the standard of expected quality has been raised to an unreasonably high point, with a few obvious exceptions. At some point in your life, you've probably heard a saying somewhat along these lines. Without the rain, we would never feel thankful for the warmth of the sun. That is to say, if your life was an endless stream of perfection and everything around you constantly great, you'd quickly lose the ability to measure said greatness. Sometimes we just need to have ourselves a bad time in order to remind ourselves how good we truly have it. Enter Shovelware. Shovelware is defined as, quote, a haphazard collection of software assembled in terms of quantity rather than quality, and low-budget, poor-quality video games released in the hopes of being purchased by unsuspecting customers. The most famous historical example of this is most likely E.T. for the Atari 2600. A game that was betting its entire existence off of brand recognition, but ended up being so impressively bad that it is now widely attributed as being the straw that broke the camel's back, leading to the video game crash of 1983. When people wanted to buy a new game in the 1980s, there wasn't a way for them to research it ahead of time like we have now. Atari 2600 games had these epic-looking, hand-drawn box arts that made their game look cool and exciting, even though the Atari was so primitive that you'd never be able to tell what the in-game objects are supposed to be without being told beforehand. Later on, with the explosion of video game-related magazines, and eventually the internet, gamers would have the opportunity to gain intimate knowledge of a title before ever being in the same room as it. Be that as it may, most people don't do their research, and shovelware was here to stay. If you're a millennial like myself, there's probably one console library that sticks out in your mind as being particularly egregious when it comes to the sheer volume of poorly built games allowed to be published for it. And that's the Nintendo Wii. Did you know that in North America alone, there were 1,262 games released for the Wii? Now, I really loved the Wii. And there are some generation-defining titles that were released for it that oozed quality from every orifice, but My goodness, a solid 90% of Wii games were more along the lines of, well, this. The Wii library has an overwhelming number of games that were seemingly made in an afternoon or two by someone in their basement. Hell, some of these games were reskinned and re-released as completely different titles several times over. Take the infamous Ninja Bread Man, for example. Released to North American audiences by Data Design Interactive in the fall of 2007, this game is on countless worst Wii games of all time lists, and for good reason. On its face, it's a basic 3D platformer that has the player awkwardly hopping around environments, collecting these scroll things that for some reason activate a teleporter gate thing that you enter to complete the level. Not sure why they're scrolls, or why they would interact with this teleporter, or what Ninja Breadman is doing here, or why these pastries want to stop him, or really anything about this game's story at all, but here we are. There are enemies scattered around for you to slash with your katana, but honestly I wouldn't bother interacting with them at all since they're more trouble than it's worth. Between the awful combat and controls, you're most likely just going to take damage, and there's no benefit to killing them either. Just try and get through the platforming with Breadman's painfully short jump and excruciating camera controls. The only control over the camera's positioning is recentering it. I thought we had moved on from this style of camera system after the N64 era. At least the N64 had an excuse with that weird controller. Nothing will make you want to pull your hair out more than failing a jump for the 5th time in a row in a game that looks like it was made for babies. While anyone watching you looks in disgust, as if you're an octogenarian playing an FPS for the first time, looking into the sky and spinning around hopelessly. If you don't fail a million jumps like I did, you'll be able to finish the entire game in about 20 minutes, because there's only 4 levels, each one being about 5 minutes long. Now, I'm not one to criticize games for being short. In the era of Ubisoft 100+ hour open world grind fests that have you doing the same task over and over to artificially stretch out the game length, I actually appreciate a nice and concise experience that's well thought out and beautifully polished, like, say, Link's Awakening. 20 minutes, however, is a bit extreme. Keep in mind that this isn't a WiiWare title that people downloaded for a handful of Nintendo points back in 2007, rest in peace. This was a full physical release on store shelves. Imagine being a good little kid and it's Friday night in the fall of 2007. Your parents take you to your local Blockbuster and let you pick out a game to rent for the weekend. You look through the shelves of games and see this. Katanas are cool, and it looks kid-friendly enough that Mom won't object. Sure, let's try that out. You spend your car ride home reading the box over and over, all excited to spend your weekend diving into this new game. You get home, slam it into your Wii, and it's over. Dedicated to the hard-working team that pulled together and made this happen? Are you sure about that? The way this old gingerbread man looks is exactly how I feel after sitting through this garbage. So that was pretty bad, right? Well, what if I told you there was another game, by the same developer, called Mythmakers, Trixie in Toyland, that was exactly the same game? All they did was reskin some game assets, and bam, a brand new physical release on the Nintendo Wii. I'm sure Miyamoto would be so proud. Even the music is reused. Man, I can't believe these guys were brazen enough to release 2 of the same... Well, what if I told you there was another game by the same developer called Anubis 2 that wasn't a sequel to any game called Anubis, so I'm not sure where the 2 comes into play, but it's the same game again. Why is it called 2 if it isn't a sequel? This naming gives me a real Space Channel 5 Part 2 vibes. This time, you're placed in the shoes of jackal-headed Egyptian deity Anubis to do, you guessed it, exactly the same thing as the other games. Well, what if I told you there was another game that these absolute madmen decided to release that was yet another re-release of the same garbage? You just can't make this up. Rock and Roll Adventures is a game where you play as an Elvis lookalike, complete with little voice samples where he says Elvis phrases like, "Hey, at least you went to the trouble of having an intern say something into the microphone for this one." Now this is the rich history I live for. I've heard countless people over the years complain that franchises like Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty just release the exact same game every year. And to some extent I agree with that notion. But this is beyond anything those cowards at Activision could ever hope to achieve. If you're interested in learning the history behind the development of the 4 horsemen of the Wii shovelware apocalypse, then you should check out this video by Rerez. I hope I'm not totally butchering that name. Now, I know what you're about to say, but Crispy, you've just been talking about old games, and I only own new consoles. And that's a fair point. We live in the age of instant knowledge at our fingertips. The average person hears a game title that's new to them and they check YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, etc. to see gameplay or what others think of it. When a new game releases and it's broken, you can count on everyone and their grandma to dogpile it on social media. How could there possibly be room in this landscape for shovelware to sneak its way in, when it primarily relies on fooling an uneducated audience into picking it up? It turns out the meteoric success of the Nintendo Switch mirrored the days of the Wii enough that many IP holders of days past decided to resurrect their ancient garbage for one more hurrah. Wii titles like the atrocious Carnival games were hastily ported over to the Switch to disappoint a whole new generation of gamers. And, with a potential customer base of over 120 million console owners, why not just throw whatever garbage you have laying around into the void and see what happens? Porting shovelware to the Switch honestly makes some business sense here, and at no point have I been the least surprised to see this practice. Like the Wii, the Switch is very much marketed for all ages, and the console retains motion controls, so you don't even have to replace your old control schemes. What is surprising to me is the growing number of shovelware titles on the PlayStation 5. That's right, the console that markets itself to the hardcore, in-the-know gamer who's looking for a powerful machine capable of pushing the envelope with technologies like real-time ray tracing and native 4K rendering. Imagine my shock when scrolling through Amazon I come across this. This, gamers and gentlemen, is a 160 megabyte game on a 100 gigabyte UHD Blu-ray disc. That is the port of what was originally a mobile game. That's 0.0016% of the disc's capacity. Like, sure, release this digitally on the PlayStation Store for download, but why go to the trouble of making a physical release? How could this possibly be worth it? Not even everyone who owns a PS5 console has the disc version, so whose idea was it to do this? So of course I bought it and proceeded to speedrun the game, and I'm pleased to report that I am its #1 speedrunner. But the ride doesn't end there. Oh no. The publisher responsible for putting Panda Hero on the PS5, GS2 Games, seems to think that they're still in the mid-2000s and are releasing plenty of eyebrow-raising titles for modern consoles. Hell, they even ported the former Wii title Martian Panic to the Switch. Take these two for example. Winter Sports Games 4K Edition and Summer Sports Games 4K Edition. The names really want to get across that these are big boy modern titles that run in 4K resolution on your big fancy PS5. Well, let's give them a shot. The first thing that you'll notice when you install them is that they take up 883 megabytes and 486 megabytes respectively. Hey, I thought this was supposed to be a big boy 4K game. Well, let's start it up and see what we're in for. Huh, no menu music, I guess. Okay, as someone who has played their fair share of off-brand sports compilation games, this is pretty standard fare. You've got your choice of playing a single sport, bunch of sports back-to-back, or doing local multiplayer with that guy you kidnapped and chained to your basement for these exact moments. Your next task is to choose between a handful of characters that fit ever so perfectly into the uncanny valley, as well as a team represented by an animal. There are 6 sports to choose from, which is pretty measly even for games like this. When I was playing through the Winter Sports series of games on the Wii, no relation to this one, on Twitch, there were more options to choose from than this. Is it possible that the level of laziness from Shovelware devs has actually increased? Ugh, gross. Just look at this character, it looks disgusting. And does the countdown sound effect really peak to the point of distortion? That's not me adjusting levels in Final Cut, it just sounds like that. The level design is really bland, and hides behind its cartoony look as an excuse to lack any detail. At least with the Wii titles, there was stuff that would catch your eye or honestly anything to look at all. And I'm now realizing that motion controls might actually be a blessing when it comes to these kinds of games, because at least it gives me something else to focus on, even when the controls are inaccurate and poorly implemented. Playing a game like Winter Sports 2008 on the Wii had me flailing like a madman, but that in itself gave the overall experience more soul than this, if that makes sense. Honestly, there's not much more to say about these. The Summer Games version is pretty much identical, and I really just wanted to mention them because I find it so hilarious that this kind of product can still be made as a physical release in 2023. Gaming YouTubers love to trash bad video games. Audiences like to watch those YouTubers rip apart hastily made products that are technical messes, creatively bankrupt, obvious money grabs, or all of the above. Possibly the most famous gaming content creator, AVGN, has made his entire career based on taking a big ol' stinky winky on games from studios like the infamous LJN. Don't get me wrong, I like criticizing bad games too. But unlike other creators who warn you to stay as far away as you can from these software train wrecks, I invite you to not only stop and stare at these disaster pieces, but come and walk amongst the rubble. Frolic in the chaos that is a Shovelware title. I dare you to put a couple hours into Michael Phelps' Push the Limit for the Kinect, or My Stop Smoking Coach, Alan Carr's The Easy Way for Nintendo DS. It might just give you a whole new perspective when you come back to playing the latest big budget release. Thank you so much for making to the end of this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would really mean a lot to me. And to all my subscribers, thanks for being patient with me. I know this video took a while to release. Until next time, I'm Crispy Johnson, and you're not.